Samsung makes 40% of its phone here, more than in South Korea. Apple assembles iPads and AirPods here. Intel, LG, Foxconn, all here. Vietnam exported goods and services worth $422 billion in 2025, with electronics alone worth $135 billion. This country went from war devastation to becoming the world's second largest smartphone exporter. And right now, it's winning the US-China trade war. Here's how Vietnam became Asia's newest manufacturing giant. In 1975, when the war ended, Vietnam's GDP per capita was just $80. The economy had collapsed. 3 million people died in a war. 2 million fled as refugees, including skilled workers and professionals. By the mid-1980s, inflation hit over 700%. Economic growth was near zero. Vietnam was one of the poorest nations on earth, poorer than most of Africa. Then in 1986, the Communist Party launched Doi Moi, the renewable reforms. This was Vietnam's economic revolution. The government abolished agriculture collectives, removed price controls, welcomed foreign investment, and embraced export-oriented growth. Vietnam learned from China's reforms but moved faster. The transformation was immediate. Between 1990 and 2000, GDP grew almost 5 times, from 6.5 billion to 31 billion US dollars. GDP per capita jumped from $95 in 1990 to $390 by 2000. Poverty dropped from 70% to under 2% today. Vietnam's real explosion came in 2000s. The country positioned itself as an alternative to China. Lower wages, political stability, and a strategic location near major shipping lanes. In 2025, Vietnam's GDP hit 514 billion US dollars with 8% growth, the second highest rate since 2011. Manufacturing grew 9.97%, the fastest in 6 years. Foreign companies poured in $32 billion in new investment in just 10 months, with manufacturing capturing 60% of that capital. Here's what makes Vietnam a China challenger. Samsung employed 200,000 workers here and produces half of its global smartphone in Vietnam. Intel, Foxconn, and Pegatron followed. Electronics now represents over 30% of Vietnam's total exports. In 2025, for the first time ever, Vietnam's electronic exports to the US surpassed garments, the sector that built the country. The China factor is critical. When the US imposed tariffs on China, global manufacturers needed a backup. Vietnam became the top beneficiary. The US trade deficit with Vietnam jumped from $123 billion in 2024 to $146 billion in 2025, a $20 billion increase despite facing 20% US tariffs. Why? Because companies are fundamentally reconfiguring supply chains, not just rerouting goods. Vietnam is importing machinery and components from China, assembling them, and exporting to the US. The numbers tell the transformation story. In 1986, agriculture was 37% of GDP. Today, just 12%. Industry jumped to 38% and services to 42%. Vietnam is no longer a farming economy. It's an industrial powerhouse. Manufacturing FDI in 2025 reached $18 billion, nearly 60% of all foreign investment. The northern provinces have become electronics manufacturing clusters rivaling anything in China. Foreign companies account for 75% of Vietnam's exports. Samsung alone represents 30% of total merchandise exports. Foreign firms employ 35% of Vietnam's formal workforce. Half of all employment in Vietnam depends directly or indirectly on exports. But here is the challenge. Most Vietnamese workers in these factories are semi-skilled assembly workers. Just 4% hold university degrees. Vietnam is stuck in the middle, too expensive to compete on pure low wages, not advanced enough to compete on high-tech innovation. Domestic firms operate at only 64% of the technological frontier that foreign firms achieve. Vietnam sits at the center of the biggest trade war in modern history. Apple, Samsung, and Intel are expanding Vietnamese operations. Luxshare is assembling airports. The semiconductor supply chain is moving here. Vietnam is becoming the second largest chip supplier to the US after Taiwan. But the risks are real. Vietnam's economy depends heavily on both the US and China, its top two trading partners. Political pressure from both superpowers creates impossible choices, and automation threatens to eliminate 60% of current manufacturing jobs by 2040. Vietnam went from $80 per capita in 1975 to $4,700 in 2024, from war-torn to the world's fifth largest electronic exporter, from subsistence farming to $514 billion manufacturing economy. The question now, can Vietnam climb from assembly hub to innovation leader before the trade wars force impossible choices? Vietnam proved that even war-devastated nations can transform through strategic reforms and global integration. But staying ahead requires moving up the value chain fast. If this economic transformation story gave you new perspective, consider subscribing for more deep dives.